Sudden Spore virus outbreak triggered a zombie apocalypse that brought the world to its knees. When the crisis erupted, all the cities were overrun by the undead. Ethan was driving with his girlfriend Emma, trying to escape to the countryside. But suddenly, a blinding light flashed. When Ethan regained consciousness, his head was pounding. The deployed airbag and the blood smeared across the shattered windshield made it clear. They'd been in a serious car accident. Ethan had no idea how long he'd been out. The impact had left him with amnesia, his memory frozen at the moment before the disaster began. There was no sign of Emma in the car. Panicked, he stumbled out, shouting her name. But the eerie, desolate town offered no response. That's when Ethan noticed something unusual. His arm was in a cast. Written on it in red marker was Emma's name. He started walking along the deserted road. Everywhere he looked was in ruins, abandoned, and eerily silent. It was clear the zombies had already torn through this place too. At that moment, Ethan spotted a truck approaching in the distance. He ran into the road, waving his arms to flag it down. But in a world like this, the most dangerous threat often isn't the undead, it's other humans. And Ethan hadn't learned that yet. The man in the truck, a gruff-looking guy with a thick beard, didn't respond. Instead, he raised a gun and aimed it straight at Ethan. Panicked, Ethan dove behind a wall, trembling. Before he could figure out what to do, a bullet whizzed out from the shadows, taking down the bearded guy in an instant. The truck's driver tried to make a run for it, but met the same fate, shot clean through the back. Ethan sat frozen, his heart racing, as relief washed over him. He'd narrowly escaped death. Moments later, a woman stepped out from hiding, calmly surveying the scene and starting to clean up the mess. Seeing that she wasn't aiming her weapon at him, Ethan mustered the courage to approach. He told her he was searching for his girlfriend, but the woman didn't respond. Instead, she handed him a task: help her move the bodies. However, just as Ethan began, his amnesia struck again. He suddenly blacked out, collapsing to the ground. When Ethan opened his eyes again, he found himself lying in an unfamiliar room. The woman had brought him back to her house. Still dazed, he looked around, confused by his surroundings. Descending the stairs, he found the woman waiting for him. She introduced herself as May and explained that she'd been living here alone for years. Her only companion had long since turned into a zombie, now locked up in her backyard. Although Ethan seemed harmless, May wasn't one to take chances. To test whether he truly had amnesia, she handed him a gun and told him to pull the trigger on her. It had been over a decade since the outbreak. If Ethan's memory really was stuck in the pre-apocalypse days, he would still be naive and clueless. And sure enough, Ethan looked utterly confused. He had no idea how to handle it, passing May's test without even realizing it. In truth, if Ethan had pulled the trigger, the gun would have misfired, exploding in his hand and likely taking out his palm in the process. Later, with bits and pieces of memory guiding him, Ethan managed to help May repair her solar power generator. Grateful for his help, May rewarded him with a hearty dinner of roasted possum that evening. As the night stretched on, the two shared a rare moment of joy, dancing together to the soothing melodies of classical music. But Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Emma. After returning to his room, a memory suddenly came flooding back. Before they were separated, he and Emma had agreed to meet at a cabin by the lake. There was a birdhouse hanging from a tree nearby, and it might contain a clue to her whereabouts. Late at night, Ethan quietly stole the car keys. With only fragmented memories to guide him, he drove through a lake he seemed to recognize. As he looked around, a familiar feeling washed over him. He and Emma had been here before. When he saw the small cabin, he called out her name, but there was no answer. Desperate, he broke a window and entered. Inside, he found another unfamiliar mother and son. The woman, clearly wary, aimed a gun at him. Just as tension rose, a terrifying growl echoed from outside. In that moment, Ethan didn't hesitate. He rushed to help, and together they barely managed to keep the zombies at bay. But just when they thought they were safe, one of the zombies grabbed the woman's hair, pulling her dangerously close. Without a second thought, Ethan grabbed a hammer from the ground and crushed the zombie's skull, saving the woman. However, the horror didn't end there. Even after a headshot, the zombie didn't stay down. It revived. Its tenacity in the face of death was both horrifying and relentless. Like humans, these creatures were driven by a primal hunger. They didn't die. They lingered, waiting in the shadows for their next opportunity to strike. In Ethan's memory, he felt like he had only been apart from Emma for a few days. But the woman told him they had been there for weeks and hadn't seen anyone else. Noticing how exhausted Ethan looked, she suggested he get some rest while she kept watch. Soon, Ethan fell into a deep sleep. In his dream, he saw Emma again, but suddenly, his cast was covered in blood. Ethan jolted awake, only to find himself lying in a pool of blood, the stench of decay filling his mouth. The woman from the night before was now lifeless, her body in the same blood-stained mess. His memory was a blur, only a few broken fragments of what happened. He vaguely remembered that zombies had attacked them the previous night, and they had failed to stop them. Looking at the woman's body, new growth was sprouting from her ear, a sign of the zombie transformation beginning to take hold. Panic set in as he quickly fled the cabin, only to discover that the woman's son had also been killed. Suddenly, a zombie appeared behind him, but this one wasn't like the others. It seemed to remember something of its past life. It was trying to speak, fear in its eyes as it reached out to Ethan. The next moment, May arrived. She didn't blame Ethan for stealing the truck. Instead, she shot the zombie in the head to prevent it from coming back to life too quickly. While it wasn't enough to completely kill them, it would slow down their revival. At that moment, Ethan noticed a birdhouse hanging on a tree. When he opened it, he found a phone inside. On the screen was a message from Emma. Her face was streaked with tears as she spoke, saying that not only was she trying to avoid zombies, but she was also taking care of Ethan, who had amnesia. Suddenly, the phone powered off as the battery died. Ethan, in a fit of emotion, yelled out in frustration. They quickly calmed him down, telling him that she had a charger back at her place. Before they left, she even kindly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, but Ethan had already forgotten her. When he looked at May with confusion in his eyes, she had to reintroduce herself again. With the truck out of gas, the two had no choice but to ride bicycles back. As they passed a gas station, Ethan suddenly remembered that he and Emma had been here before. They had planned to gather supplies, but instead, they had encountered a zombie. Although Ethan managed to shoot the zombie, just as the two of them embraced tightly, Ethan suddenly snapped back to reality. Bone he had just gotten was mysteriously shattered. I know. Less than tripped, so. Not long after, they returned to the cabin. Seeing the scratch marks on the door, May immediately became alert. Sure enough, after some searching, a man stepped out from behind the car. May threatened him to drop his weapon, and Ethan searched him to ensure he was unarmed. Only then did May ask him what he wanted. The man explained that his name was Tom, and his wife had gone missing 2 weeks ago nearby. Running low on food during his search, he saw May's cabin lights and came hoping for some luck. May offered him a deal. He could help chop wood in exchange for a meal. During this, Tom made an excuse to use the bathroom, secretly retrieving another hidden handgun. Unbeknownst to him, May had already noticed. At dinner, she warned Ethan not to eat anything. Once Tom was well fed, May helped Ethan back to the room to rest. But suddenly, Ethan's amnesia flared up and he collapsed on the floor. Seeing that the only problem was dealt with, Tom dropped the pretense and pulled out a gun, demanding to know where May's wife was. At that moment, he felt a wave of dizziness. It turned out May had secretly slipped a sedative into his food. She quickly grabbed a wooden crate and knocked Tom unconscious. Later that night, Ethan woke up to find 2 unfamiliar men had broken into the cabin. They were Tom's accomplices. As May came downstairs, one of the men quickly subdued her. During the struggle, a syringe fell to the floor. At that moment, the unconscious Tom woke up. He explained that his wife had gone out 10 days ago to gather supplies, and the last place she visited was this cabin. After that, she was impossible to reach. He was convinced that May had killed his wife and told Ethan that he had been deceived all along. After that, Tom dragged Ethan upstairs to search for evidence. Sure enough, after some looking around, they found a backpack filled with many people's IDs and jewelry. Among them, Ethan discovered Emma's necklace. Doubt crept into his mind. Could it be that Emma had already been killed by May? Feeling betrayed, Ethan was furious. He grabbed a gun and forced May to confess the truth. And I'd say, Kinkin, it did. Meanwhile, Tom's companions arrived at the barn and used an axe to break open the door. When they turned on the lights, they were horrified to find a mutilated body lying on the bed. Upon seeing his companion's body, Tom was consumed with rage. He grabbed May's modified handgun and was ready to finish off the intruder. Then, May knocked over a chair and freed herself from her restraints. The scent of blood in the air triggered an intense hunger in Ethan. Don't worry, Open and then. When Ethan woke up again, he had completely forgotten who May was. May was already used to this by now. After reintroducing herself, she told Ethan that their food was running low and that he would need to help hunt. However, while getting dressed, Ethan was suddenly flooded with memories. It was right after the disaster had begun, and he and Emma had fled to a farm for safety. The owner of the farm was a cautious, bearded man. To make sure they weren't infected, he insisted they strip down for a thorough inspection. Once he confirmed they were safe, he invited them into his home. The man's name was Kai, and he and his daughter had prepared dinner for the two of them. At that moment, Ethan was once again pulled back into reality, but when he looked down, he noticed that the heart on his cast had turned from red to green. He looked at May in front of him, sensing that he might have been deceived by her all along. Without hesitation, he aimed the gun at her. That's complicated. Suddenly, a flood of memories surged into Ethan's mind. It turned out that back at the gas station, Ethan had been bitten by a zombie. He removed the cast, and sure enough, the wound beneath had sprouted a ring of green plants, indicating that he was slowly transforming into a zombie. But as long as he ate, this process would stop. However, this would also cause Ethan's memory to fade, taking him back to the time before he was bitten. At that time, after entering the farm, now May's residence, Kai had warmly welcomed them. But Ethan's cast and the strange changes on his face had raised Kai's suspicions. Emma, taking Ethan to the bathroom to calm him down, then returned to the dinner table alone. At this moment, the older man suddenly told his wife to take their daughter and leave, clearly having seen through everything. How long you been feeding here? However, the wife, unable to leave Ethan upstairs alone, decided to check on him with her daughter. The next moment, hearing the commotion, Kai tried to go upstairs but was stopped by Emma. The two struggled, but Emma was no match for Kai. Taking advantage of the moment when Kai's heart was pierced, Emma grabbed the gun on the ground and shot Kai, though her face was permanently disfigured in the process. Just like that, the kind family who had taken them in, father, mother, and daughter, was lost, all victims of the chaos. Upstairs, Ethan, having consumed the mother and daughter, gradually regained his senses. Looking at the bloody scene before him, he couldn't accept the fact that he had turned into a monster, letting out a painful cry. Meanwhile, Emma, who was hiding at the door, could only silently weep. Emma, how long have you been doing this? Dear God. It turned out that the woman in front of him, nay, was Emma. From that point on, they stayed on the farm, hunting down innocent people who passed by, keeping Ethan alive until he transformed into the old woman he was now. Thankfully, his memory loss made it much easier for Emma to feed him. After consuming flesh and blood, Ethan's transformation stopped, and his aging process halted as well. The brutal truth was too much for Ethan to accept. He couldn't bear the thought of causing more innocent lives to be lost for his sake, and he couldn't bear to see Emma, the woman who loved him, turn into a killer. So, he carried her up the hillside, intending to end it all. However, in his monstrous state, even the desire for death seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. At that moment, Emma arrived, realizing that everything she had done wasn't what Ethan truly wanted. As they remembered the precious moments they shared in the past, they kissed deeply. But in the next instant, Ethan's condition took over, and his insatiable hunger consumed Emma's flesh. In the end, they cast aside their humanity and became a pair of zombies, forever together.